I felt like he didn't love me. And I'm only speaking for myself. I don't know about the rest of my siblings. And it felt like he didn't love me because I didn't feel a connection. I was connected, but I wanted some of that connection back. And it's only as I've got older I realised that, it wasn't that he didn't love me or love us. He had his own, when, we check on, learn about his background after he'd passed, speak to my aunties and uncles and learn about his past, because he never talked about that much. He didn't, and what I realised was there was trauma for him.
This episode was going to be about neuroscience and your work in the health industry and all of that. But you did make mention of trauma, and I said, no, that is something important to treat. It is something that we are going to treat for years to come in this podcast and in our organization, A-Classes Media, because it is fundamentally important for us in the diaspora and also for us in Africa. Because a lot of us are under this influence of trauma. Something terribly bad happened to us. And it cannot go away by pretending that it's going to go away.
Yeah.
We haven't healed ourselves from the 2 episode or 3 now, slavery, colonialism, and now the neo-colonialism. And we think it's going to go away. No, it's not going to go away.
No, it's not. Emotional trauma can show up physically in our bodies. Sometimes we don't realize that we have been traumatized. But these are some of the symptoms that, we can look and think, right, okay, so I'm feeling these. If you are, somebody that's a professional that has somebody that with all of these things in front of you, then it's worth going back and doing a bit of a history and finding out a little bit about their social background, finding out a little bit about, their physical health, finding out a little bit more about, their spiritual health. So you're having a holistic, get their story, just as we're talking about storytelling. That will help to identify the places where actually there's some trauma here.
Thank you for joining us in today's presentation. My name is Obehi and I help purpose-driven entrepreneurs to own their stories so they can attract the right audience and drive success. I am the author of the Storytelling Mastery, a 5-part book series that takes you by the hands through the ABC of storytelling. If you find that interesting, you can claim the first chapter free at aclasses.org/free chapter. Now, before we start into this presentation, let me quickly introduce you to our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-step transformative journey to reshape your professional and business narrative for success in less than 19 days. And it's available at academy.aclasses.org/story. If you feel that as an entrepreneur, you want to make your competition irrelevant by leveraging the power of your story, then take action. The program is currently available at a pre-launch of 50% discount from the original price. That offer is not going to be available for long, so take action now if you are interested in owning your story and using it to attract the right audience so you can serve them in line with your mission and key purpose in life. Now back to today's presentation.
Okay, so kind of grew up in a family of, there's 4 siblings, myself included, so there's 5 of us all together with my parents. It was relatively happy childhood. I think one of the things that I would say was that my father wasn't, in my opinion, I can't speak for the rest of my siblings, but it felt a little bit like he wasn't available for me emotionally. So I spent most of my childhood trying to get his approval and all of that. So by the time I kind of left school and was finding my way in the world, and I found myself in quite toxic, emotionally toxic relationships. So that seemed to be a feature for me when I became an adult and left home, and found myself in abusive relationships. So that was my early adulthood. That was the trauma for me, and I wasn't really sure why I was attracting those kind of people into my life. So it wasn't necessarily always just in the romantic relationship as well, but also in the workplace. I would have friends that would be toxic, which I could now see as toxic. And it was like, what was it about me that was attracting those kind of people into my life? And it was only when COVID happened, the whole George Floyd thing, I was still working. And over the years, I would work with, as much as I was doing all the clinical stuff, I would be working on my side hustle, would be working with women, speaking at various women's events and stuff, and just having private conversations with women who were experiencing stuff. And so we were sharing similar stories. And it felt like, because I'd been through some of that, I was able to help others. So it was like coaching informally. So when COVID happened, the whole George Floyd thing happened. And I remember being really impacted by the George Floyd thing to the point where I almost felt like I'd lost my mind. There was this trauma that I felt. It was as if I knew this person, although I never didn't know him from Adam. But it was like I knew this person, and it was a trauma to me. And I remember being at work and deciding that I couldn't, because of the nature of the work that I did, I wasn't able to go on the ward that day, and I decided that I was going to have an office admin day. I just couldn't go up onto the ward. So I had that day, and I remember trying to print something off, and it was in the printer was in another room where the other nurses were. So I went in to go collect the printing, and then one of them was like, "Hello, Marcia, how are you? Are you all right?" And then I just turned around and said, "No, I'm not. I'm not all right." And I just went into this meltdown. And then I had to take time out from work. I had about a month off work because I needed to kind of process what I'd seen. But what it did do was trigger so many different things. I had to process all of this. And I'd just come out of a toxic relationship as well. So there was a lot of stuff going on for me. And it was, I took some time out, and I realized actually there was a lot of healing. I decided that I was going to leave work. And that was the other thing as well, because my manager I wanted to reduce my hours initially, but my manager at the time was saying no, because I ran a specific service. And if I reduced my hours by the amount that I wanted, which was only 2 days, which would meant that I would work 3 days, the service would suffer. And I just thought, well, what about me? What about me? And it was in that moment that I thought, I cannot put my job ahead of me anymore. And my job, I am more important than this service that they want me to run. And I thought, I'm going to take early retirement, because if they can't let me reduce my hours, I need to be in control of my life, not my work. So I did take early retirement, and I lost a third of my pension because of it. But that was okay. And then I decided, I took some time out then to kind of just process everything that had happened to me and where I was going to go, what my life was going to look like. And one of the things that I felt at that time in 2020, there was, especially with lockdown, the amount of women that were in toxic relationships, the level of abuse had risen during COVID. And that was kind of where I was at, whether it was physical abuse or whether it was emotional abuse, I felt like I needed to help. And I started off by doing a podcast, actually, and it was called Free to Be Me. And it was well received. So then I decided that I was going to retrain as a coach because I wanted to be able to, all this knowledge that I had and was helping people, but I wanted to serve people in a way that was going to be even more effective. And I believed at that time that having being trained to coach properly would mean that I would give people a better service. So that's what I did. And it's kind of evolved over the time to where I'm at now. So I still have, coaching clients. So I do one-to-one. I have a program called the Personal Core Transformation, which is all about working on a very deep level with someone working at that core. So they spend a whole day with me and we really dig deep, and there's different modalities that I will use. So they spend a whole day with me working towards transformation, and then they have follow-up with me to make sure that things are maintained. So they'll have another, and it depends on however long they need, they will have that with me and they have access to me. So that's that. So there's that program, which I call my signature program. You can still do ordinary one-to-ones with me and a group program as well. So I still offer those for female clients, but also what's really important is, and the area that I've recently moved into is working with organizations to help them to become trauma informed, to help organizations to become courageous, and compassionate spaces to be in, because we spend so much time at work, don't we? And work can traumatize us as well. So for me, it's helping organizations to do that. And I think that is so, so important. And so I do that through a couple of programs. One of them is the Compassion Project that I work, and it's helping organizations to understand what it means to be trauma informed, to even understand what trauma is. And I think a lot of us tend to think of trauma as, an event that's happened, a big event. So it could be, I don't know, a car accident or something that we recognize as a trauma, and everybody knows, oh, that's awful, this awful thing that has happened. And yes, it is a trauma, but the others, and we might call that, let's say, big T trauma. And then you have the other little T traumas that are the everyday stuff that happens. We won't recognize it necessarily as a trauma. We will go ahead and think that's just life. So it's those drip things that happen on a daily basis. So if you're in a traumatic relationship, being put down every day, that's a trauma that builds up over time. You're confused. That's a trauma that builds up over time. You get gaslit, that's a trauma over time because it leaves you confused. All of these things, you lose your self-esteem. All of that is a trauma. And what happens is over time, the drip of these things that happen on an everyday basis that we might not recognize ourselves as a trauma will build up and have the same effect as the big thing that happened, the car accident, or whatever that big thing that everybody can see. The thing is, it will still have the same effect. It has the same effect on the brain as well. In terms of trauma, we will feel it in the same way.
Thank you so much for that. All right, Marcia, let's take some time to move back now. So did you actually grow up in the UK, or did you grow up somewhere? Were you born in the UK? Spend some time helping me understand that.
Yes. I was born in the UK. My parents are part of the Windrush. I don't know if you've heard of the Windrush the Windrush era. So they came here in the sort of my dad was probably late 50s. My mum here was in the 60s. So I'm a 60s baby. I was born in 1962. So, was born here. My parents are from the Caribbean, so they're Jamaican. So, yeah.
All right.
Very.
So tell me now, when you look back to you as an infant growing up in the 60s, okay, now and also in the early 70s, what do you remember seeing around you? How do you begin to frame your reality around?
That's an interesting one. 70s was quite an interesting time. There was lots of different influences. I think there was the whole social. There was a lot of two different things going on. There was culturally. There was the music. For me, growing up in the 70s, just how we engage with one another very differently to how people, young people do it now. But there was two things going on. Politically, there was a lot going on, which impacted me politically, as well as the kind of social way that we were being socialized into was very different as well. Politically, there was a lot of racism. I remember I said socially as well, so the music reflected that as well. And you could hear that in the music. So it was almost like a way that we resisted. There was a resistance through the music. I can look back and see that now, So the fight for us, for equality, the fight for freedoms like everybody else. It might not seem like that, this is the UK, everything is, but for us, particularly as Black people here in the UK, it was, and from my own experience, it was tough. But and certainly when my parents were here, they experienced the whole, when they first came here, they experienced the whole, can't get anywhere to live. So my uncle, when he and his wife came here, they bought their house. So by the time my parents came here, they were able to rent rooms in my uncle's house. So they didn't have to, go through the horrors of, having to knock on doors and saying, please, have you got a room? And to be told, no Blacks, no dogs, no Irish in here. Thank you very much. So they didn't necessarily have that particular experience, but they did experience racism. It touched on us. We, being born here and going through the education system, most of us, not all of us, but most of us left school. Imagine going through a whole system from 5 to 16 and come out with very little qualifications. I mean, if you took on that, because I left school with no qualifications, and if I had let that penetrate me, I wouldn't be sitting here now being interviewed by you, because my education happened after I left school.
What does that mean? Explain that.
School failed us. Education system didn't serve us as Black people. We were put in the lowest sets at school because they felt that academically we weren't capable. And I can remember, in class, I would do all right. And my mom would come to, parents' evening, and they would say, oh, yes, Marcia's doing well. And I know that this is right across the board. It wasn't just me, but it would be, oh, yeah, Marcia's doing all right. And then people said, but why can't she sit, this GCSEs, whatever they were, exams? Oh, we don't think she's quite up to that one. So we'll let her sit the CSEs, which is lower. And what happened was I left school. I didn't get all the marks that I wanted. I had one qualification, which was English language. Rest of them I failed miserably. And so, of course, we take that on board and we think it's something to do with us. Wasn't that, because all my education happened after I left school. Imagine I went on to do, I had to go back to, did my nurse training. I had to go back to college, did all my, whatever I needed it to do then, got jobs, went on to do 2 degrees, have gone on to do a postgrad, so there's a lot of things that, and it's not just my experience, a lot of us that age group did. Our education happened, our formal education in school didn't happen, so we had to do it after we'd left. And I do believe that there was racism within the education system that's caused that to happen to us. And I have 3 sons, that have gone through the same education system here in the UK. And I can't even believe that the issues are still there. I have grandchildren that are going through the education system even to this day. And there are things that I'm thinking, wow, some things have not changed. And it's, we battle through, and, it's about challenging those stereotypes. And things have changed to somewhat, but those issues are still there, some of them. And going back to your original question about, growing up in the 70s, we were traumatized as young Black people here in the UK. We had to forge our own. We weren't, like you couldn't go into the city centre and go to a club if you wanted to do that. You'd get chased out. There was nowhere for us to, for young people at that time to, young Black people at least, to have a good time. So we would make it for ourselves. So we would have, house parties and stuff like that. And I remember we used to have bonfire night. We'd celebrate bonfire night like the rest of the community. Half the time we don't even know what we're doing, but we celebrate it. And everybody's having, I remember this one occasion when there was a riot. I think it was 1979, I think it was. So I was 16, just leaving school. And there was a bonfire which we have every year. And I'd sneaked out with my sister, actually. We were naughty. Mum didn't want us to go, but we went anyway. And it was unfortunate that was the day that, the evening that the riots happened. And what had happened was we were having a good time, went to the bonfire, music, food, all of that was great. And the next thing I knew was lots of police, vans. And remember, bearing in mind, we were children, we're kind of 13, 14, 16. I think the eldest probably was in maybe early 20s, so there was a mix of young people, and they just turned up with police dogs, van loads of, police and dogs. And all I remember is them just letting the dogs out. And I remember seeing people being bit and people just running. It was just a mock. And then this riot happened. And I think, when I look back on that time, they could have just dealt with things a little bit differently. There wasn't anything for young people to do at that point. So, they shut it down. But
what's actually the cause of the police intervention? Was there fighting? Did they disturb? Were you guys disturbing the neighborhood?
No, there wasn't anything, as far as I was aware, that was like that. I think it was the fact that they didn't want us to have the bonfire. But what I'm saying, I think, is that they could have handled it in a different way rather than send police down with and there may have been 1 or 2 elements of trouble like anywhere else. But essentially, I think it would have been a really good evening if they just monitored and left it alone, But they came in kind of like gung-ho when I look back on that situation, and they just let the dogs go on everybody. And everybody's screaming and running for their lives, including myself, thinking, what on earth has just happened, and witnessing people getting bit and all of that and put in police vans. It was a horrible time, but it was also a time of racial tensions in the UK at that time. It was reflected in the music, American music, reggae music. So I remember one of the albums that was very pertinent at the time was, I forgot his name now, but it was called what's going on. And it spoke about of the social issues that was happening at the time. And I loved that album because it reflected my life, reflected the life of my friends. Yeah. So it was a really interesting time, was the 70s growing up. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I was seeing the music just now. Because we were talking, I went to research something like, I think, like Marvin Gaye or something.
Marvin Gaye. It's Marvin Gaye, and it was I couldn't remember. It's just slipped me for a minute. Marvin Gaye was that album. What's Going On really spoke into. That was my favorite album at the time. Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can pull it out so I can show you. Wait a minute. I should be able to show you that. Yeah, there were some of the things that I really said about it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
So those were your moment, right? Those were your time.
Those were my times. And then there was and then there was there was like the American influence, with the soul music and that. Most of the music had meaning. It spoke into our lived experience at the time. And then there was also the other part, which was, my Jamaican roots. So there was a lot of the reggae music as well was very much, music had just changed as well. So you had a lot of what we call conscious music. There was a lot of Rastafarianism. We needed an identity because we didn't fit here in the UK. We didn't necessarily fit in Jamaica. You go to Jamaica and they'd be calling you English, the new shit. So we kind of felt like we were in limbo a little bit, because there wasn't anywhere that we kind of fit. I think it's really interesting because, like with my children, the younger ones and the grandchildren, they feel very British, my generation, a lot of us will probably, even though we're born here and we're British, feel more Jamaican. And yet there's a disconnect between Jamaica and the UK, and we're just kind of sitting in the middle. We're not really sure where we fit, So that was quite I think the younger generation feel much more assimilated. I think we were displaced. Our parents wanted us to be British. And what happened as well in the 70s with Margaret Thatcher, our parents, my parents and that generation were invited here. And they came and they did the work. And I think it was round about the 70s, very, late 70s. We then they brought out a law where you had to pay to become a citizen. So my mom did, but my dad never did. He refused. He wouldn't do it. He says, well, I'm from the Commonwealth. They brought us here. Why should we have to pay lots of money to be, to become citizens? We are, and I look back on that time. My dad's passed now, but I think
was that the time of Margaret Thatcher that they were making those laws and you need to pay?
I believe so. So it would have been the 80s, end of the 70s, early 80s. And, and I think if that was like now, if my dad was alive today, he probably would have had real difficulty in terms of his status now, because then they had the whole Windrush scandal, lots of people getting sent back to, places where, and their descendants getting sent back to places where they've never been.
How do we even explain that? Looking at, I don't even know how people reason. I don't want to say a kind of a defect in the reasoning here of Eurocentric people, because how do you explain that now that you brought in a young person to come and work for you, promising heaven and earth? They have spent their youthful age contributing to your economy. Now, at a certain age, you will deport them. You will really deport them to a land where they have never been for several years. Like you have mixed them Now, like dry cattle, you send them home. How do we make that reasoning? And we still want to call ourselves morally upright. I mean, how do people rationalize that?
Do you know what? I don't know how they rationalize that. I think if we look at it from an institutional perspective, and I think globally, most institutions are patriarchal, narcissistic. They kind of run in that way, and I'm talking about institutions, and I believe that's something that's contributed to this, this whole idea, that somehow, where we come from, these people that, part of the Commonwealth, that we actually are not worth anything. Just send them on. They've done, they've come and done the job. Now send them, send them out. It's a very narcissistic way to be. So they're entitled. And these are systems. I'm not necessarily talking about people, but I'm talking about the system needs to change. And I know that it's people that make the system, but there's something around systems that need to change. I can't rationalize it because it makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. But I know that if my father was alive, he would have been caught up in that, because back in the 70s and early 80s, he refused. It was his belief that he was already a British citizen and he never had to pay. So those that didn't, those are the ones that were finding the issues today, and end up being put on flights, sent back to countries that they haven't seen since they were babies, or, and even those that are born here have found themselves in that situation as well.
So I mean, not like when you get to the land after you have been asked to come, you get into the land, you are not given a permit to stay. Like you are when you get to the UK, they just throw you into the camp to start working. You are not given a paper to sort of get renewed. So at a point you get, I'm not sure I understand that process.
Right. So the process back in the 60s and 70s, remember, they were invited. They were part of the Commonwealth. So their papers, they would sign up, whichever country they were at. In Jamaica, yeah, I'm going to come. We sign up, and the papers were sorted. They were natural. They were supposed to be naturalized because they're British citizens, because they came from the Commonwealth. So when they came here, they were already entitled to work. So there was no issue about them finding jobs at that point. The issue was whether the employer would want a Black person working for them. That was the issue. It wasn't an issue of you can't work here. It's not the same as it is now. It was because everybody knew that they came to rebuild the country after the war, and they wanted the labour. They wanted people in the NHS, and so that's what happened a lot. When I was growing up, when I was doing my training, my nurse training, I was coming in at the back end of that era when the NHS was, predominantly filled with Black women, nurses from the Caribbean and Africa, midwives. So I was coming into the back end of that. So there was no issue in people working. What's happened is, their papers that were at the Home Office, a lot of them, I mean, the scandal, when you read the scandal, go back, a lot of the papers were destroyed that was there, that people come in with. They have to apply to come. And so now people have to prove that they, had the right to work here. And, because there's nothing in the office to prove that. So people were getting sent. And how can you have somebody that's been living in the country since they were the age of 2, let's say, grow up here, go to school here, have NHS number, have national insurance number, all of these things, paid the taxes, worked, and then you turn around and say you're an illegal immigrant, you need to go, and put them on a plane when they've built their life here, everything has been above board. I know personally people that's happened to, and it hurts my heart. Yeah.
So something like a paper getting burnt. But if paper get
Well, I
burnt,
don't know if it's
the
burnt.
institution.
I know that I mean, and that's there in the public. It's, we can Google that and find that. But I think the Home Office at that point, with the whole Windrush scandal, had lost. I don't know what happened, but they'd lost a lot of information. Lost a lot of information on people.
But if they lose it, that should the UK government should take the responsibility, because it's the government property, no? If I give you money to hold, you lose the money. You don't tell me to pay the money. I give it to you to hold. They are taking the people's data. If they cannot produce it, they don't put the responsibility on the people they have taken the data. It is there. It is a government. That is what I'm not trying to. I'm finding it difficult to understand.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't understand this, and that's why so many people are having to sign petitions, so much lobbying of the government to be able to say, what you're doing is not right. There has to be other ways to be able to support people that have been here for like forever. People have lost jobs. People have lost homes that they've paid for. People have actually not getting treatment, because one guy, it was in the papers, had cancer. He was refused treatment because they're saying that he didn't belong here because he couldn't prove it, and the man had been here like forever, since he was a child. And so, and I from my understanding is that there's a few people that have passed away now whose lives have just been ripped apart through this whole Windrush scandal. So, and that's what it is, a scandal. Yeah.
And the UK government hand is cleared from that. They cannot be held responsible. They were helping these poor people though, and now we are tired of helping you, so go away now. That is probably how they had narrated the story though.
Possibly.
What is scam? They scam people.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, now let's go back to your story again. You were talking to me about your parents. You were talking to me about your father. So I'm trying to understand that part of the story, because now I believe when people come to you that you are helping, you share your story with them. You help them understand that you know what they are going through, because if you haven't gone through what they have gone or what they are going through, I think it's going to be pretty difficult for them to understand. But by the time you help them understand that, okay, this is something that I've gone through before, then it becomes a little bit easier now for them to hear what you're saying or to pay attention. I think that is the whole essence of the story in itself.
Yeah.
So share with me more about that, your experience with your father.
Okay, so I think to kind of give it some context as well. When people come to me for help, they come based on the relationship that they're currently in or have been or have escaped, and they may not necessarily make the connection to past trauma. So part of my work is to look at the root. Where is this, where are these patterns for you, for the client coming from? And it's when we can identify the root, that's when we can work on healing, to bring permanent transformation. We want irreversible transformation. So for me, I wanted to know, what was it about me that was bringing me into these kind of relationships, whether that's, as I said earlier, whether that's in the romantic relationship, whether that's with friends, whether that's with, in the workplace. What is it about me? And what I came to realize, because I myself had to have, work, I had to do the work, I had therapy, I, sought help because I needed to understand myself. And I've always been that person, that overthinks everything, I want to analyze everything, there's always something behind something. And so that was my character. So I knew, I had that awareness to know that something needs to change with me. And that's when I went to seek help for myself. And one of the things that I do know is that there was a connection between my relationship with my own father and my subsequent relationships with, I guess, other, my partners, my husband, ex-husband, and even with authority in the workplace, so those are connections that I was able to kind of make. My father, he worked really hard for his family, worked really hard, was a very quiet man, and worked, and then he died, but he never, for me, I felt like we were living in the same house, but I never knew him, if that made sense. He was the disciplinarian, a very quiet man. He just worked, as I said. He never really interacted with us. My mum was the person that interacted. He was just dad. So I never had the connection. So I felt like I was always looking for his approval. And I suppose for a lot of years, as I grew older, I felt like he didn't love me. And I'm only speaking for myself. I don't know about the rest of my siblings. And it felt like he didn't love me because I didn't feel a connection. I was connected, but I wanted some of that connection back. And it's only as I've got older, I realized that, it wasn't that he didn't love me or love us. He had his own, when, we check on, learn about his background after he'd passed, speak to my aunties and uncles and learn about his past, because he never talked about that much. He didn't, and what I realized was there was trauma for him. And I've had to learn this over the years, that he experienced trauma himself, and that it was hard for him to be able to demonstrate love to his children in the way that we would want, that I would want. And I remember one day, my dad was sitting in the living room with his newspaper, and he's reading his paper. And I remember walking behind the back of the sofa and desperately just wanting, what would he do if I put my hands around him and just gave him a hug? What would he do? Imagine, that's your dad. And that's what I was thinking. And then I plucked up the courage, and I remember putting my arms around him, from the back of the sofa, and while he's reading his paper, and I put my arms around him, and he just went like this. He just touched my arm like that. That was his way of showing me that he appreciated what he did. He didn't kind of go, oh, Marcia, embrace. I just got that back. And he continued reading his paper, and I knew that was okay, and that was good enough for me. And I knew then, it's all good. My dad loves me. He didn't reject me, And I think because he didn't know any different, he didn't. He really genuinely didn't. And I interpreted, my experience of him as him not wanting or loving me. And that wasn't the case. And it's only through therapy, through understanding the dynamics of from hearing from his, his family, his siblings, and knowing actually when my dad experienced trauma himself, and going back to this whole kind of neuroscience thing, it's a way that we protect ourselves. We don't give, if we give too much of ourselves, then we lay ourselves open to danger. The brain perceives it as danger. We need to protect ourselves. So I think and so for me, it's important to get to the root. When we get to the root, that's the bit that we can start to heal and ask, is this story that we're telling ourselves actually true?
Thank you so much for that, Marcia. You see, this episode was going to be about neuroscience and your work in the health industry and all of that, but you did make mention of trauma, and I said, no, that is something important to treat. It is something that we are going to treat for years to come in this podcast and in our organization, A-Classes Media, because it is fundamentally important for us in the diaspora and also for us in Africa. Because
Yes.
a lot of us are under this influence of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Something terribly bad happened to us, and it cannot go away by pretending that it's going to go away.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
haven't healed ourselves from the 2 episode or 3 now, slavery, colonialism, and now the neo-colonialism. And we think it's going to go away. No, it's not going to go away.
No, it's not.
So I was actually, there is a professor in the UK. It's a Nigerian professor in the UK, with which we really are in this work of trying to help people understand the impact of trauma in what is happening today, in the life that we are living.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, until we really go to the root causes of why we are behaving the way we are behaving, we will not heal ourselves. And where is this manifesting now? It's manifesting in different ways in politics. That most of our, according to him, that most of our leaders are actually operating on the basis of trauma. They don't know what they are doing. They know that they're really animal. They are human beings, but they are operating on the influence of the torture that we have inherited. Because later, maybe we'll have time to look into the fact that sometimes some of this trauma might not actually be the experiences that we have had ourselves, but we have inherited them, the epigenetic trauma.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that's a really important thing that we have to be aware of. I think we need to understand that it's a real thing, is epigenetics. It's real. It's real. And a good example of that, I think, is the story that I said originally when I, heard about the George Floyd thing and how that impacted me. Intergenerational trauma. There is that thing around that collective trauma, because we know as Black people what that is. And especially when we were thinking about things like slavery, and how the evidence is there to say that our DNA is changed. How is it then? For example, if we think about let's say a father has specific traits, or walk a particular way. We know about that, but there might be an experience that person has had. So let's say let's use this for an example. Let's say it's alcohol, okay, and the alcoholics or whatever. Let's use that as an example. They have a son. Let's say that the father died really early, so he knows nothing about the fact that his father was an alcoholic, but he becomes that. Is there something in the gene? What happens is there is a change in something happens to our DNA when we conceive, when a man fathers a child. It's in the DNA, it's changed, and we pass these things on to our children. And that's why it's really important that we heal. So just as we can pass on the negatives, we can pass on the good. And that's why it's important for us to heal. And I think in terms of the work that I'm doing, in terms of working with with the work that I do with organizations, and it's helping them particularly here in the West, it's helping them to become culturally competent, because I'm sure, I don't want to be painting everybody with the same brush, but I think it's, to be culturally competent when you are employing people, of color, people from different cultures. That's, having that competency, cultural competence, that is the key. It's, as far as I'm concerned, to transformed, inclusive workplace. So if we don't have, and if we're looking at this from, and I'm speaking about from, but for those of us that are living in places like Europe and the States, if there is that lack of cultural awareness, organizations will struggle really and truly to understand and respect diverse cultures that they've got within their workplace, and that in itself will lead to all kinds of different misunderstandings and conflicts. And I truly believe that, I've worked in spaces where they've not really understood and I've had a hard time. And I'm not the person who, I think there's, I will work hard towards, making it okay for everybody. But there are times when misunderstandings and conflicts happen. And I think it's because their cultural competency wasn't there. There isn't the insufficient practices and policies that, they have insufficient practices and policies that are in place there. So many workplaces don't have those strategies to address and support people. They're not inclusive enough sometimes. And I believe that some of those traditional approaches fail to create an inclusive environment. They're not communicating properly. Employees, should I say, are so dissatisfied. And then for those bigger organizations, they wonder why people keep, they get a high turnover of staff. They wonder why no. And then, it's costly to the companies as well, because you're going to have to then put out adverts for, new people to come in. That's costly. And you got to train them and all of that. Invest in the people that you've got there. And that includes making sure that your organization is culturally competent, that is, culturally aware, so that you can support your people of color that are in your organization and keep the talent, because there's so much talent there. And that's what I am about. It's about really helping those organizations to understand the goal that they've got and work with that. Trauma, racism, all of those things, the collective trauma is hard. You have to be culturally competent to understand those unique perspectives that we carry, when or people don't understand that, our organizations don't understand that, you're continually triggering people, and then it becomes a health issue for the people that are, being burdened by this. Chronic illnesses. Honestly, it's just like, when you're knocking down Skittles, then more Skittles get knocked down, then more Skittles get knocked down. So it's really, it has a knock-on effect is what I'm trying to say. And so for me, becoming organizations, particularly to become trauma-informed, to be culturally competent, those are all important elements that's the only way I think that we can move forward. And I think it's a global thing. It's not just here in the UK, but, it's an issue that I think we all need to be addressing. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Now, before you were making mention of trauma-informed. Could you explain that, and what does that mean?
Okay. So to be trauma-informed really is about understanding. It's all those things, those elements that I've talked about. When you are trauma-informed, you are seeing the person not as wrong or behaving wrongly. You ask yourself two questions. So the question, when you're dealing with people, is not what is wrong with that person, but the question is what has happened to that person. It's understanding that trauma is not necessarily the event that's happened to somebody, but it's that person's response to what has happened to them. And I think that's what being trauma-informed means. When you look at somebody and somebody presents to you, in a workplace situation, for example, that's really where it's going to be more explicit. Your question, every time you're working with somebody, it's about what's happened to them, not what's wrong with them. And that's the essence of being trauma-informed. You know that everyone has experienced trauma. There is nobody on the planet that has not had some form of trauma. And it's really understanding what trauma is, which is what I was trying to talk about earlier. the kind of big T traumas and the little T traumas. But it's when you're in the workplace, when workplaces are being, to become trauma informed. A lot of times they're doing that work anyway and don't realize. So it might be looking at your policies. So what do you have in place that's actually, it might be that even the environment that they're in, how can you make that more trauma informed? And by making it more trauma informed, it might be things like, maybe just soft furnishings in the canteen, having things in place that if there's a problem, people can go. And it's safe. It's making the environment safe for people. That it's not just a tick box exercise for an organization, but genuinely having things in place, genuinely bringing in people that will train them around what it means to be competent, to be culturally competent, what it means to be trauma informed, what does it mean to have your organization be compassionate to and receptive to your employees, should I say, and all of those things you just have to kind of take into account, bring all of that together and work on making your policies much more trauma informed. So it might be you have things in place. I mean, most workplaces now talk about diversity and inclusion, and that's all well and good, but to underpin all that, it needs to be trauma informed as well. And by that, it means making an organization more compassionate to people's experiences. A lot of times you hear people say, well, you've got trouble at home or whatever, leave that at the door. Do not bring that into work. So everything is separate. Your home and work is very separate. So you don't mix the two. But if someone's having trauma at work, they are going to bring it to the workplace. It's going to show up in some shape or form. And it's being able to, to ask the right questions to support people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Another thing also I would like you to speak on is the emotional trauma. That aspect that have to do with the emotion, I think it is important. How do you explain that to somebody so that they can get a good grasp of that, so that they can understand it?
Okay, so emotional trauma. A lot of us can relate to that. You might not see, like when we talk about trauma in the medical sense, you break a bone or something like that, and you end up in A&E or emergency room and you get bandage and you have a pot put on or something. With emotional trauma, you don't see it, but it can show up in ways like anxiety. It can show up like depression. It can show up like what you call post-traumatic stress disorder or complex PTSD, is another way of putting it. It can show up in illness. People start to get what you call, and I'm sorry, I forgot the term, but they start to have symptoms that, you can't necessarily put a finger on. The medical term, got headaches, not really sure why they're having these headaches, or stomach upsets that not really sure what's causing it. And so they'll have lots and lots of investigations trying to find out what's going on with this person. Or you may develop something like autoimmune conditions. These are all stress-related and emotional traumatic situations can trigger these things and bring them on. So it's understanding that sometimes a lot of a lot of these illnesses and ailments that we have, you trace it back and it's trauma-related, fibromyalgia. And I'll give you an example. I currently have a cardiac loop recorder fitted. Okay, so it's not a pacemaker, but what happened was I was getting some very abnormal heart arrhythmias, so heart readings. What was, and it expressed itself in me by having really, really bad palpitations. So my heart was racing, racing, racing. And I'm like, why is it doing that? You know, I'd be at rest and then my heart would just go boom, 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 boom. And nobody really knew why, but it got quite scary. And what was also happening was that I would have these weird blackout things. And I had to have that investigated. Turned out that what they were saying, my heart was doing these weird things. So they fitted what we call a cardiac loop recorder. So every 3 months, I take a recording, put it on my chest, take a recording, and it gets sent remotely to the hospital, and they monitor my heart. And occasionally they might ring me and say, "Oh, what were you doing yesterday? Because it showed this or it showed that." Now, prior to that, I was in a very, very, very toxic relationship, emotionally toxic. And I had no idea that I was actually being abused. I actually thought it was me. Prior to that, I was fit and well, never had any major issues in my life. Never, the only hospital admission I've ever had was to have my kids, you know. So, you know, but being in this, and I never made the connection with all these weird things that were starting to happen to me on a physical level, you know, this ill health, not feeling good, my heart going fast, you know. Then I had problems with my back. I ended up with a cyst on my spine that was pressing on my nerve root, which meant that there were days when I wasn't able to walk. And then I ended up having to have surgery on that. And this is all while I'm in this relationship, you know, and I was, yeah. But I never made the connection. And it's only after, you know, I've come out of that and doing the work that I have been doing. Emotional trauma can show up physically in our bodies. Sometimes we don't realize that we have been traumatized. But these are some of the symptoms that, you know, we can look and think, right, okay, so I'm feeling these. If you are, you know, somebody that's a professional that has somebody that with all of these things in front of you, then it's worth going back and doing a bit of a history and finding out a little bit about their social background, finding out a little bit about, you know, their physical health, finding out a little bit more about, you know, their spiritual health, you know, so you're having a holistic, get their story, just as we're talking about storytelling, that will help to identify the places where actually there's some trauma here. And maybe this is something that the client hasn't necessarily recognized as a trauma. And sometimes people just see, you know, experience things and just push it to one side. Right, let's just move on. I'm not going to deal with this now. Push it down and they carry on. But it's there. And it's there in the background. It's like a computer program that's running in the background. It's there and it's causing you to make decisions about things. It's causing you to respond in certain ways to things. It's causing you to trigger, you know, it'll trigger you, you know, when things happen, but it's there running in the background. So you haven't escaped it. All you've done is compartmentalize it and shut the door, but it's there, always running in the background and actually running your life and you've not realized.
All those things that have happened in the past, even though sometimes we don't pay attention, they actually control all in the present. And I think that is very important that people should pay attention. And you talked of blackout sometime as some symptom that you did talked about. Would you want to spend a few more seconds there so that somebody should know when certain weird things are happening to you, certain strange things are happening to you at the point you need to pay attention, look very carefully to see what is happening to you. Could you say something more about that?
Right. So I initially I didn't make the connection. I didn't realize actually that, this was I was physically now manifesting the emotional trauma. I was having symptoms that were new, different, and I didn't understand what was happening. It's the warning system, your body. If we don't do something about things, our body will do it for us. Our bodies will do it for us. There's a book by a man called what's his name? Bessel van der Kolk. And it's a best-selling book called The Body Keeps the Score. And that was a very, very interesting book for me and it's all about trauma and how we store trauma in our bodies. So we have to understand the mind-body connection, because we do store trauma in our bodies, and illnesses, all of these things. If we can work with that trauma and deal with that, a lot of these things that we experience might actually be healed. We can prevent things, from happening to us. I certainly I would be having these blackouts that didn't last long. And I think what drove me to my doctor was when I stepped in the shower and fell out of it again and just found myself, on the tiles in the bathroom thinking, what just happened? Am I able to get up? Have I broken anything? And that's what forced me to then think, this is not good. I really do need to get this sorted. And so I went, and that's when they did all kinds of investigations, and I ended up with the loop recorder. And this is your body's way of telling you, you need to do something. You need to stop what it is you're doing. But it's really hard to make the connection. Your body stops you because it's trying to protect you. Your brain is trying to protect you from harm. But in some instances, it actually causes harm, if that makes sense. But if we're not listening and we're not in tune to what our body is telling us, we need to rest. We need less stress. We need to sleep. We need to eat better. We're in toxic relationships. The last thing you're going to be thinking about really is eating. Or it could be the other way around, where that's all you think about doing, because it just takes your mind off everything else that's going on. So these are all unhealthy behaviors that we do to feel better. But if we recognize that these unhealthy behaviors that we are doing is actually a trauma response, then we can do something about it. But sometimes we need help. When we're in the situation, who's going to help us? How do you get to that point where you get help? What are you going to do? I'll obviously keep it confidential, hide the person's identity, but I got a phone call from no, it wasn't a phone call, it was a text from an ex-client very, very recently, who's had a stroke and is now currently in hospital. Stress, trauma, and it's now forced into a position where that person is now going to have to do things in a different way, because I think they probably felt that they couldn't do it in a different way prior. Now they've been forced to. And the road to recovery might be a long one, but now they're forced to do things in a different way. What I'm trying to do is help people to understand the trauma and work with that, so that they're not forced into a situation where they're not put in a position where they're forced. to make those changes, but can do those changes or make those changes before it gets bad. You know, I've had a little mini stroke. You know, thank goodness it never affected my, you know, my limbs or anything. But what it did do was cause me to be blind for some time, a good few hours, which was really scary. And I understood what was going on because I was coming from a medical background, so I knew what was happening. I did know what was happening to me. Again, that was a warning for me to really take things in hand. I've got to make sure that I'm okay. Go get the help. And this is what I want people to understand. There is none of us on this planet that hasn't had some form of trauma. We might not necessarily recognize it as trauma. So it's about understanding what does that mean? You know, and I think the question to ask is not what's wrong with me, but what happened to me to bring me to this place. That's the essence of being trauma informed.
This is a conversation we are going to have for a very long time because the effort is so big, it's so huge on everybody, but particularly within our demography and our community. It's affecting us in different ways. I don't know if you have seen some video, some terrible video where maybe, for example, some pastors, I just want to use that as an example, no? We say, okay, maybe using some verses in the Bible and tell the community to be eating grass. They are in the field, they just tell them eat grass. People will be eating grass, like on the ground, eating weed on the ground. They are quoting Bible to make people do it. This have happened many times. It's a different occasion, or maybe he will put a, you know, they will do a lot of weird things that people, of course, you know, where it become a little bit more dangerous for us Africans in Africa, is that we will say this is a spiritual thing. So what was supposed to be a natural thing that we can find a solution to, we say it's a spiritual thing. And therefore, I am not a spirit in the sense of you are not a spirit in the sense of I can see you, we can see me. We are not literally invisible. So I can't solve that problem. So we leave the problem there because we see it as a magic, but it's not really magic. That individual is suffering. The only thing that is happening is that he happened to be in the position that he can control other people. Therefore, he's controlling other people from his level of suffering. And that stupidity is not able to be understood. I just use that as an example. Other area that we might really also pinpoint is that where we see leaders who are supposed to be leading people, but running them like property. Because if you understand what you are supposed to do, you need to know that you are dealing with human life. If you are not doing that, somebody should be asking a question like you are saying, not really what is wrong with you, but what have happened that you are responding to? Because you are a human being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, that is such a I was going to say deep thing, because I think it goes back to that thing. No matter who we are as human beings, whether we are, you know, at the top in governmental circles, whether we are the cook in a canteen in a school, you know, I'm just using that as an example. We are human beings. We feel, and we will experience trauma. And if we haven't dealt with it, people who are set to a higher standard because they are in those roles, you know, can be just as broken as the next person. The problem that we've got is sometimes it's ego. It's that part of us, that unhealed part of us, that is the driver for doing things. You know, when we're in positions of authority, the unhealed part of us takes control because we want to feel like we are somebody. And so, you know, if we go back to the example of, the church person that, is causing, he's in that place where the congregation is now eating grass based on a scripture. I mean, what would be the purpose of that? Now, what that person is doing there is clearly unethical, clearly, from a church perspective would be deemed as evil, because you're not looking after your flock. But what's caused him to behave in that way? Why is he wanting to be in control? Why is he getting pleasure from the fact that he can cause a whole congregation to do that? The essence of that is it's around power. As human beings, we want to be powerful. We want to have power. We want to have power over our everyday lives. And you know what? In a correct environment, that's not a problem, because we should. But when we're doing that, it's about recognizing our humanity. It's about recognizing our capacity to have compassion for the next person. And I think it's those basic things like having compassion and love, fairness, all those values that we hold dear. If we're not able to kind of express that through the work that we do, through being, an official or a pastor of a church or something like that, then that's where we get it wrong, and that's where we end up hurting people, when we're not true to our own set of values, those values that actually help us to give our lives purpose and meaning, and help direct, that vision that we have for our own life, that, our purpose, to serve others doesn't work then, if that's what did. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marcia. In fact, I could really have more questions to ask you, because like I just told you, it's an argument that we're going to spend hours and days and months and years talking about. Anyway, for today, somebody is asking for solution. What are some of the remedy that you will recommend for people that are going through trauma, emotional trauma? And indeed, there are a lot of people that are going through this situation. What are your recommendations?
Right. So one of it's acknowledging. I think the first place really is for people to recognize that actually I need help. It's that bit where you're thinking I need help. Self-awareness is the first part of call. Once you have that, it's about finding somebody who can help you move yourself forward. So it'd be about finding, maybe a therapist, whether that's a psychotherapist, a counselor, a coach, depending on what it is that you need. But find somebody that professionally that is able to help you. If we're talking about trauma like toxic relationships, or in the intimate sense, narcissistic abuse, that kind of thing, because that's my area. What I would suggest is that you work with somebody who actually has experience of narcissistic abuse, whether that's in the intimate relationship, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's a family member, anything like that, because it's a specific type of abuse, emotional abuse, and you need different tools. So it's important that people are aware that, if it's something like that, they do need to make sure that they've got the right person to work with. Okay, so that's number one, is having that self-awareness, and that things need to change for you. Secondly, it's about owning those parts of us that we know. It's not about beating upon yourself, but we do need to own those parts of us that we know that we've played a part, and to forgive ourselves and forgive ourselves at that point. It's about recognizing as well that now that I've kind of acknowledged and I'm owning, now it's the time to do the deep work, addressing some of those things that have held you back, all of those limiting beliefs that we carry that stop us from being our best selves, and then then we move on to the kind of healing, what needs to be done, okay, to move forward. So it's starting to think about, like I mentioned, forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others. It's understanding that, especially with narcissistic abuse, a lot of this wasn't your fault. It's about changing, doing the work to change mindset. It's doing the work now to actually heal. And there's lots of different things, different, ways that we can help people. I help people to do that. But it's actually working on the healing aspect of it. What needs to be done to help that healing journey. And it's recognizing you deserve better is number one. You did not deserve the treatment that you got. Understanding that you are worthy of good love, not this toxic thing that's been happening to you, but that you deserve it and that you are love, because we all are, that you, and then we work on building up that self-esteem. What kind of things would help you to do that? And then it's all about self-care as well. And when I say self-care, I don't just mean, having the hot baths and the candles and going to bed at, decent time. All of those things, eating well, all of those things are important. And that, for me, that's the lifestyle modification that needs to be implemented, which will go a long way to helping us with the transformation. But also, for me, there's a kind of a deeper level for us to be, for healing to take place. And so we're taking in all the different contexts of your life. So it's what is going on, what needs to be healed in your physical life, what needs to be healed in your social life, what needs to be healed in your financial situation, what is going on there. All of these things that impact on your life needs addressing. So we'll help with that. And then we move on. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, he's got the base, which is all about the safety. That's the entry point. Then you've got the next level, which for me is all about ownership. Okay, so we've owned what's going on. I need to now start to look at things. Now we're looking at, taking responsibility. We're going to do that now. We're going to start to do the inner work, the healing. I need to let go, forgive, and then we move up again. What are the practical things that we need to be doing now? Start to set goals for ourselves. And then the top goal is what he called, what did he call it now? What's the word he called? Self-actualization. And for me, it's not so much it is that, but it's moving women from, or anybody from that place of, okay, so now I'm okay. I can, I've got all my nice systems in place. I can, go and get that job and feel good about myself. It's taking it up a notch, that there's purpose and meaning. So that's the bit where we want to get to, so that you're not just feeling good, but you now have purpose. You now know what your life is all about. And that for me is complete package. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I appreciate it. You know what? We are going to come back again on another day to talk more, because it is important. There are so many questions that I want to ask you that I don't want to let all of them go. But for the sake of time, in 1 minute, tell people how to find you. This is important.
Okay. Right. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Marcia Hylton, MH Coaching and Consultancy. You can find me on Instagram, which is marcia.hylton.5, the number 5, the digit 5. You can find me on Facebook actually on the same marcia.hylton.5. And I am in the process of having my website. Hopefully it should be ready this week, actually. So what I will do is I'll give you the links to that, Obehi, so you can let other people have that as well. But yeah, so the website should be done soon, and that'll be live again so very soon, hopefully this week.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much, Marcia. It's really be an interesting conversation here. It really be highly valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.